like I'm just awkwardly.
Okay. I thought to myself, I am wiser than this man. Neither of us probably knows anything that is really good. But he thinks he has knowledge when he has not. While I, having no knowledge, do not think I have. Socrates' apology speech is more of him defending his beliefs and values rather than him apologizing for them. He knew that group collaboration was the best way to improve the intelligence of the individual. Each and every one of us can relate to this ideal of philosophy because we all needed to do credible research to present the best group speech we possibly could. Today we're going to describe the rhetorical situation, summarize and provide a rhetorical analysis and application of Socrates' apology speech. Now we're going to talk about Socrates himself. He is a Greek philosopher from Athens, Greece, who was born in 470 BCE and died in 399 BCE. Little is known about him except from what his students wrote about him, including Plato. He was executed for corrupting the youth and for disbelieving in the gods. According to August Liebman, who is author of the article Socrates and Psychotherapy, published in 2002, Socrates turned the focus in philosophy from the physical world to the human world, including the moral. Socrates contributed 4 aspects to philosophy. The first one was the concept of knowing oneself. The second was knowledge with goodness. The third was an unexamined life is not worth living. The fourth is the role of philosophy is to assist a person in reflecting on his or her own life. Socrates' most important accomplishment is the Socratic method, which is asking continual questions until contradiction was exposed, which proved the fallacy of the initial assumption. Socrates' values and accomplishments were the reasons why he had to give his apology in the first place. He was defending his actions. Now that we know about Socrates, let's talk about the setting of the speech. From the article Criminal Procedure in Athens, Greece, and the Trial of Socrates, it was said that there is no public prosecutor and there is just judicial proceedings that could be initiated by any citizen. A poet named Meletus initiated Socrates to appear before King Archon in the royal stoa, which is their legal building. King Archon determined that the lawsuit Meletus was presenting was justifiable under Athenian law, and a date was set for the hearing to take place. The context is significant because it sets the stage for his apology. Because he was supposed to arrive in the royal stoa on a specific date, the citizens of Athens would have known that Socrates was speaking in defense of his actions.
Next, we'll talk about the causes of this speech. During his life, Athens was in a transition to decline after humiliating defeat by Sparta in the Peloponnesian War. This caused Athens to enter a period of instability and doubt about their identity and place in the world. The result of this is that they clung to the past glories and the notions of wealth and a fixation with the physical beauty. According to the University of Missouri, Kansas 2002 website article, Criminal Procedure in Ancient Greece and the Trial of Socrates, his beliefs challenged the Athenians, and it was already a sensitive topic, putting a huge emphasis on Socrates and his beliefs. Hence, it put more heated spotlight on him at the time of his apology. Now we will talk about the audience. It was a jury of about 500 people. He did, however, single out Meletus, and the jury represented most of society. It was the workers, politicians, informal speakers of the gods, which were the poets and scholars. According to Sandra Peterson, author of the 2011 book, Socrates and Philosophy in the Dialect of Plato, Socrates started with saying how the jury's minds had been poisoned by his enemies when they were young. Sophistry he had the reputation of sophistry from his enemies who were envious of him, and it caused him to have a bad reputation. They didn't believe in how he was teaching the younger generation and his disrespect towards the gods. He got the young people to think, and that caused them to challenge the social norms. You can't really tell how the audience reacted because it was so long ago and there really is no historical documentation besides him being sentenced to death. The audience wasn't impacted as much because one of the first things he said when he went in, he was going to talk how he normally would, not just a certain way to the court. Lastly, what I will talk about for the rhetorical situation is the main influence. The main influence was philosophy. It was the reason he was giving the speech in the first place, and he was attempting to prove the worth of his philosophy more than trying to save himself. According to Richard Kraut, author of an article from Socrates from the Encyclopedia Britannica, he was, for many centuries, little more than an Athenian who had been condemned to death, but when Greek texts, and thus the work of Plato, the Stoics, and the skeptics became increasingly available in the Renaissance, the thought and personality of Socrates began to play an important role in European philosophy. The speech in Socrates didn't influence anyone for quite a bit of time.
Next, I'll talk about the summary of the speech. First, we must understand that Socrates' apology speech is not apology. The word apology derives from the Greek word apologia, which means defense. Socrates begins his speech with talking about how his accusers have made false accusations towards him, and he would appreciate it if he were able to tell the truth. His charges being that he is not recognizing the same gods as the state by creating and teaching new gods to the youth. He asks the court if they can understand if he uses words more than once and doesn't make sense because he is unfamiliar with the way the court system works. Socrates begins his defense by saying how his accusers are the ones who do not believe in God, and he asks the jury if he can explain the falseness of his very first charges before his latest charges. Socrates states how Miletus is one of his accusers, and Socrates asks the jury if he can sum up his own charges by saying this. Socrates is an evildoer and a curious person, who searches into things under the earth and in heaven, and he makes the worse appear the better cause, and he teaches the aforesaid doctrines to others. Socrates defends himself by saying how he is trying to spread his wisdom to everyone. His wisdom allowed him to acquire lots of fame, but it also created many enemies because of the embarrassment it caused to people. He also says how he is said to be a teacher, but he explains how he isn't one because he doesn't teach the youth and doesn't take money. After he is done explaining why he is falsely accused, he asks Miletus to stand and interrogate him. Socrates' interrogation was more to embarrass Miletus and make him look bad. Socrates says how Miletus should be the one to be sentenced to death or be exiled. After the interrogation, Socrates begins to defend his philosophy instead of himself. After all is done, the jury finds Socrates guilty. Socrates then has a proposal. He asks if he can just pay a fine or be exiled instead. The jury still sentenced Socrates to death, and in the last part of the speech, Socrates comments on it. He ends the entire speech with asking the jury to punish his son if he cares too much about money and riches. He then ends it by saying, "The hour of departure has arrived. We go our ways. I to die, and you to live," which is what God only knows. Next, I'll talk about the most popular quote. Socrates says, "I'm very conscious that I'm not wise at all." What Socrates means by this is that he knows that he doesn't know everything, and one person can't know everything. But a bunch of people who put the knowledge together are able to know everything. So by our group putting our knowledge together, we are able to give this speech.
So now that we know the content of the speech, thank you, we can now get into what exactly it did wrong. Now, to start with, Socrates didn't really defend himself here. His defense of his actual person was pretty awful. He was condescending to the members of the jury. He only defended his philosophy. But when defending his philosophy, he made salient points. His ultimate argument was that without his line of thinking, without this relentless persistence and the asking of questions, the Greek government will become like a lazy horse, and it needs a gadfly, i.e. Socrates, to sting it. So, while I can't say that it was a good speech, it failed to save Socrates' life, it was a good defense of Socrates' philosophy. So where can we apply this speech in our lives? There's not much to take out of it. The speech itself, again, failed to do what it promised to do. It didn't convince the jury of Socrates' innocence. The better thing to take away from here is that you should not talk to a court like Socrates did. Don't condescend to the people who are in charge of whether or not you should live. The apology is not good. It's not a good speech. It's great if you want to get into Socrates, but on the whole, it wasn't well delivered. The audience didn't take it well, as judging by the fact they executed the guy. No. I don't have an ending, damn it. But that's, darn it. That's basically what I'm getting into. It wasn't a good speech. And I'm trying to think of how I could go from there to like the big sappy application to